Hi, I'm Arthur Brock, and I'm involved in a number of strange projects, most of which involve social collective intelligence and building tools for the next economy. Emerging Leader Labs is a kind of social change or social enterprise incubator. Agile Learning Centers are schools that operate on Agile software development type principles that are organized to help support students in self-directed learning, but to actually give them the tools for self-organization and management that they need. And then there's all this weird work that I do, which is kind of branched out of the Metacurrency project in terms of building some tools for essentially the next internet, sort of next generation communication protocols and next generation currencies for building an open economy where we can effectively interact around new kinds of commons. We are a little slow to recognize and integrate the kinds of changes that are actually going on around us. Most of the things that I'm going to talk about are actually changes well underway, in progress, that we just haven't systematically adapted to yet or socially adapted to. So we're still kind of viewing the world with old maps. And in particular, I think the whole structures that we have around centralization, whether that be centralized governments or corporations or currencies, they're all shifting, such that it will not be long before we have tools for being able to manage things together that will very much outcompete the old kind of pyramidal command and control type of model. Like if you think, just as metaphor, if you think about how Wikipedia, how quickly that replaced kind of all of the old school encyclopedias, because it's just a superior structure to get knowledge from everywhere and then weed it out and edit it and sort of improve it, curate it together with people who care about curating it. It's just going to be trying to pay some small pool of experts to gather that knowledge. And that same type of architecture is happening everywhere. You can look at Bitcoin as like an early primitive example of ways to distribute currency issuance and control without any kind of central authority. Those types of patterns are spreading. And so the way that we think of the work world, the way that we think of jobs, the way that we think of employment, the way that we think of education, and the type of world that we're preparing students, children to grow up into, I think are all very rapidly changing to decentralized models of being able to coordinate directly on a kind of peer-to-peer level inside of a sort of meritocracy or almost more of a duocracy. Like who actually can get the things done tends to be able to be who we want to have get it done. I'd like to point to a distinction that I kind of accidentally made to clarify how radical or how important this is. One of the classic examples used is whether we have a heliocentric solar system with the sun at the middle, or whether the Earth is at the middle, and talking about how the change of the view to the sun being at the middle instead of everything revolving around us, eroded the authority of religion and blah blah blah, all this different stuff, and as if it was a big deal. But when I look at living systems on the planet, whether we thought the Earth was at the middle or thought the sun was at the middle didn't change life on the face of the Earth all that much, right? The rabbits didn't really care what we thought, or the trees, they continued photosynthesizing, and those kinds of shifts, while interesting to talk about from a perspective of scientific models, of our ways of thinking about things, are not fundamental capacity shifts in our abilities to navigate the world. But when we have a fundamental capacity shift then it's a complete game changer. It's just a lot of changes afoot in that architecture, shifting to one that's more like a network than a hierarchy. Doing things like reversing behaviors that produce dangerous emissions, like shifting carbon balance and that kind of stuff, become much more possible to coordinate with this planetary nervous system than it was before. And we theoretically have the ability to change those things rapidly. I say theoretically because right now, most of these things are connected to an industrial age economy that has a kind of momentum to it that seems hard to change. But as these other things start outperforming that, it will, again, I think, change much more rapidly than we expect. You could think of it as moving from the scientific paradigm to a systems paradigm. Another way that I would translate that is from object-centric to flow-centric. And what science tends to be good at is looking at objects and how they bounce off of each other, that kind of thing. And we in English we've sort of interestingly snuck some wisdom about the word science into the word itself. It comes from the same root as schism and scissors and schizo. It means to cut, to separate, right? And so science has been this process of cutting everything into little parts, into little objects, and trying to identify them all, label them all, categorize them all, and talk about how they relate to each other. But when you look at things as feedback loops, which inside of a systems paradigm, everything is feedback loops. The big shift that I'm trying to get to here is looking at things as living systems and looking at businesses that way, looking at communities that way, looking at our ecosystem that way, looking at governments that way, and having the tools with which to understand how living systems operate. What we're moving toward is actually less about some sort of blind trust or putting your faith in something than the ability to have healthy feedback loops and be agile and evolve things. So to be able to say this is what isn't working and provide feedback in a way that can refine it so that there is almost this simple steps of evolution or a Kaizen type of process, an agile process where right now things tend to be more monolithic. We put something out there, this currency is issued by a central bank and has a monopoly with the government for paying taxes and for settling court cases, calling it legal tender, and we make this big monolithic thing and then we say you have to trust in it, the full faith and credit of the United States or something like that, instead of being able to create an ecosystem of things that are adapting and evolving and filling different niches and being able to have some really new excellent things start emerging and taking off because they solve problems in ways that we might not have thought of.
Wow.